Hello, everyone. I'm Loretta Byrne, and I am the National Project Manager for Research Match. Welcome to our webcast, Amplifying Positivity to Combat Social Disconnection, offered in collaboration with our featured speaker, Dr. Charles Taylor and Susan Gurley. On this webinar, you'll hear about Dr. Taylor's research on methods to manage positivity, findings from his research, and resources from the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. The information and statements expressed on this webinar are not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. You should seek your own professional counsel for any medical condition or before altering an existing care plan. So just a note about us, Research Match is an online program funded by the National Institutes of Health. And since 2009, we've been connecting people who are interested in learning about how to participate in research with researchers. Thousands of people take part in research through Research Match, and Research Match is completely free. It was started and is hosted by Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and it's a large collaboration project. So it connects you with 200 leading research institutions across the country and nonprofit organizations like the ADAA. So let's meet our speakers. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Charles Taylor and Susan Gurley. Dr. Taylor is an associate professor of psychiatry at UC San Diego, where he directs the Positive Emotion and Anxiety Research Lab. He received his PhD in clinical psychology from the University of British Columbia in Canada and has over 20 years of experience in the assessment and treatment of anxiety and depression. Dr. Taylor's research is devoted to improving treatment outcomes in anxiety and depression, with a specific focus on developing ways to increase positive emotions, strengthen social connections, and improve well-being. So he conducts research studies to identify what produces negative emotional states or what keeps us from experiencing positive emotional states. He's also the deputy editor for Depression and Anxiety, which is the flagship journal of the ADAA. Susan Gurley is the executive director of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. The ADAA is a nonprofit international mental health association. She is a lawyer and an advocate with 25 years of leadership experience in working with the mental health and access to justice fields, international development and legal reform, and higher education administration. Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate you being here. Dr. Taylor, I'll let you go ahead and share your screen.
Wonderful, thank you.
You're welcome.
How does that look?
Looks great.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to present to the Research Match volunteer community. And this is a real treat to be able to share some of our work, our recent findings, where we've been focused on developing and evaluating a new treatment approach to combat social disconnection and anxiety and depression. And this is a real privilege because it's not often that we are able to share our work with the community that this work is intended to serve, and with the community who our work wouldn't be possible. So I'm really excited. So I'd like to start by focusing on the two mental health conditions that our work is devoted towards, anxiety and depressive disorders. And although most of us from time to time will experience symptoms of anxiety or depression, what I'm talking about here are times when anxiety and depression symptoms persist for long periods of time. They may be frequent, very intense, and they're very distressing or disrupt the person's life in some way. And anxiety and depressive disorders are two of the most common mental health conditions. Anxiety disorders are present in about 1 in 4 people in the United States at some point in their lifetime. And major depression is experienced by about 1 in 6 people at some point in their lifetime. And it's important to recognize that anxiety and depression can affect anyone. It can affect all age groups and people from all walks of life. And anxiety and depression may look different in different individuals. They may experience it differently. And sometimes we might not even know that someone's feeling anxious or depressed. They may hide it. They may put on a brave face and we're not sure. But for anyone who experiences these symptoms that are persistent and frequent and intense, these symptoms cause significant disruption in their life. So the good news is that we have effective treatments for anxiety and depressive disorders. These are treatments that have been supported by research as being helpful in reducing symptoms of anxiety and depression. So we have a talk therapy called cognitive and behavioral therapy, which is the first choice recommended treatment for anxiety and depressive disorders. And we have a number of medications that can also be helpful for improving symptoms of anxiety and depression. And you can learn more about these and other treatment options for anxiety and depression at the Anxiety and Depression Association of America website, and you'll learn more about those resources later. Now, what we know is that our best available treatments, they help about 50% of the people who receive them. So about 50% of people display an adequate response, meaning that their symptoms go down, the symptoms are not interfering or impairing their life anymore. What that means is that there's a lot of work to be done. That means that for another half of individuals, they only display partial response or they don't respond at all. And that's really been the focus of my research, is to try to understand what are the processes that prevent people from developing a full response to our existing treatments. Where might these current treatments be missing the mark? And this has led to the development of a treatment approach. This is a psychological behavioral treatment approach, which we call amplification of positivity. And before I get into the specifics of what the treatment is about, what it's designed to do, I want to share a little bit about my path to positivity, what it is that led me to study positivity and to develop this treatment program. So it began as a graduate student. I was working with patients diagnosed with social anxiety disorder. That was the focus of my clinical research lab at the time. And at the core of social anxiety disorder is a fear of negative evaluation and a fear of rejection. As a result of these fears, people tend to avoid social situations. They don't put themselves in social situations, or when they're in social situations, they try to hide or try to engage in subtle avoidance behaviors. The current treatment approach for social anxiety disorder, just like the other anxiety disorders, is cognitive behavioral therapy. You might have heard the term exposure-based therapy. The basic idea is that avoidance behaviors prevent the individual from being able to determine whether their fears are accurate, or whether their fears are as bad as they thought they would be, or whether the individual is able to cope with their anxiety symptoms and concerns. And so what cognitive behavioral therapy does is it gradually allows people to confront avoided, feared situations and helps them develop skills to manage their anxiety symptoms in those situations. So as a graduate student, I was working with a patient, a man in his mid-40s, who'd experienced social anxiety disorder for most of his life. He was very socially isolated. He really didn't have a social network. He lived alone, wasn't really close with any friends or family either. And when he came into our treatment program, he had identified that his fears were that people wouldn't think that he was interesting, or that anything that he had to say was valuable. And he thought that people would think he was odd or unusual in some way. So what he did is he kept to himself. And he lived in a 3-story condo complex, a walk-up, very common in Vancouver, where I did school. And in these types of environments, you often encounter your neighbors. You might encounter them in the common spaces like the laundry room or in the front foyer. And he'd lived there for many years. And so he developed an elaborate set of avoidance strategies to try to prevent his fears from happening. So for instance, he would often avoid eye contact and put his head down when he walked by his neighbors in the hallway or out front. He would do his laundry during off-peak times when he was sure that other people wouldn't be there. And he would even leave the apartment and run errands when people were unlikely to be frequenting the common areas. So what we did with him is we taught him to gradually confront those situations, to test out those fears that he wasn't interesting or that people wouldn't like him or be receptive to him. And when he started doing this and he started reducing those avoidance behaviors, much to his surprise, that people weren't responding negatively to him. And in fact, people were quite pleased that he was engaging them in conversation. Many of these neighbors he had known for some time, but he really never spoke to. And so they were quite happy that he was engaging them in conversation. He would look at them, he would smile, he would say a few words. And so this was really exciting as a junior therapist, getting to see this unfold, that this person's avoidance behaviors and anxiety symptoms were diminishing, and he was able to put himself in these situations that he'd been avoiding for so long. Something unusual happened, though, partway through treatment around session 5. He came into session and he told us that he didn't put himself in any of those situations that he'd planned to do the prior week. And I was curious about this, and so we explored why that was. And he said that it really wasn't the anxiety or fear that was holding him back. In fact, he realized that those fears that he had, that they weren't as significant or concerning as he once thought. But he said that he really wasn't getting much out of the social interactions. He wasn't feeling enjoyment. He wasn't feeling connected to the people that he was interacting with. And he was quite disappointed in this. And he said, well, what's the point? Why would I put myself in these situations if I don't feel connected? I'm not getting anything from them. And so he stopped putting himself in those situations. And that really struck me as a student, because it made me think, well, if we're able to peel back the layers of anxiety and avoidance and fear and help put this person in these situations that have been disrupting his social life, why is it that he's unable to connect with others? Why is it that he doesn't feel that enjoyment or that drive to connect with others? And that really then led my interest into try to understand what might current treatments be missing. And so in today's presentation, I want to talk about this problem about social disconnection. This is the focal target of our treatment program that we've been developing, trying to combat and improve social disconnection. I'll talk a little bit about why positivity, what led us to study positivity, and then I'll talk about our approach to amplifying positivity and some of our outcomes from our early work. So social disconnection is extremely common. If anybody has picked up a news article, turned on the news, you've probably encountered an article or something talking about loneliness, social disconnection, social isolation. And what I'm talking about here is both the perception of feeling disconnected from others. So you might actually have people in your life, in your social network, but you don't feel connected to them. You might feel lonely, even though you have others you could connect with. Or social isolation, so actually having a very small social network. And when you survey people in the general community, the rates of social disconnection, at least moderate or greater social disconnection, range from 40 to 76% in the general population. So this is really, really common. The reason this is concerning is because social disconnection hurts our health. So when you look at social disconnection and loneliness in comparison to other well-established health risk factors, things like obesity and smoking, loneliness is on par. It's at least as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than these common risk factors. So loneliness is more dangerous. It reduces life expectancy greater than obesity. And it's as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And social disconnection caught the attention of the US Surgeon General. And he wrote a recent book, and I'm going to share a quote from this book that was quite striking. He said, "In my conversations with people around the country, I realized that no matter their health challenges, their underlying stories were often about loneliness and emotional pain. Our connections are the foundation for everything. In order to repair that foundation, we need to focus on people and not the pursuit of work and wealth to undermine that." So social disconnection is a big problem, and it has a big public health impact. So what our work is intended to do is to try to understand, well, what is it that drives people to connect with others? Because for us to understand and to be able to target social disconnection, we need to understand how it is that people connect. And so to do this, we essentially created a way for people to connect in the laboratory, a way for us to measure what's going on when people have the opportunity to connect. And here's a picture. These are two of my former lab assistants who are engaged in our social connection task. And so I'm going to have you imagine if you were a participant in the study and you've just completed some assessments measuring your mood and how you're currently feeling. And then the experimenter walks in and says, "In a moment, you're going to spend some time getting to know one of our assistants. We've developed a series of questions to help you get to know the other person and for your partner to get to know you. And we feel that the best way for you to get to know each other is for you to share some information about yourself and for your partner to share some information about themselves. And after the interaction and throughout the interaction, we're going to ask you some questions about how you're feeling and about your impression of the interaction. So I want you to imagine that you're in this situation. And I think the thing that's really interesting about social connection opportunities is they offer potential for both a reward or a positive outcome, that you have this opportunity to connect and get to know someone. However, they also offer the potential for risk or threat. What if this person doesn't like me? What if I don't know how to answer the question? What if they disagree with something I say? And so you can imagine that people experience different levels of both positive emotions, right? Things like feeling interested, excited, enthusiastic about this opportunity. Maybe they feel pleased with how it went. They were happy that they had this opportunity to connect with someone. But it's also possible you may feel distressed or nervous about the uncertainty or the potential risk in the situation. Maybe you're feeling irritable that you have to engage in this interaction, or you're upset that you have to connect with this person that you don't know. And so what we've done is we've measured these different responses throughout this social connection task. And what we do is we can look at how people respond to the task, and then we can look at how much people want to connect in the future. So what we do is we ask both the participant and we ask their partner at the end of the conversation, how much would you like to seek this person out and spend time with them in the future? Or how much would you like to spend with someone like this person in the future? And we can find out what drives people's connectedness or what drives disconnection. So we try to look at, okay, what are the predictors in people seeking treatment for anxiety or depression? What predicts disconnection? So that means that they don't want to spend time with their partner again, and their partner doesn't want to spend time with them. Well, you may think that it's these symptoms, these distressed, feeling nervous, irritable, or upset. These are symptoms that are very common in anxiety and depression. And you'd be right, that's part of the story, that those symptoms, those subjective experiences predict to some extent whether people want to establish a relationship afterwards. However, what's the most consistent and reliable predictor of disconnection are diminished positive experiences. Diminished feelings of enthusiasm or excitement, not feeling pleased or satisfied with how things went. That is the most consistent predictor of whether people want to establish a connection. And that's something we've observed time and time again in the laboratory. So that's led us to conclude that positivity connects us with others, whereas diminished positivity disconnects us. And that's really the foundation for the treatment approach that we've developed. The reason that we developed this treatment approach is because our current best available treatments for anxiety and depression, although they're quite effective at reducing symptoms of anxiety and depression, they don't do as well at repairing positivity deficits. They don't do as well at increasing levels of positive emotions. And so this is a treatment gap that we're trying to address. So I'd like to spend a little time now talking about what this treatment approach involves, and then I'll share some initial findings from this work. So one of the foundational skills that we teach people in this program is to notice and to track positive events. You say, well, why would you do that? Well, I'm sure most of us recognize that we tend to be really, really skillful at noticing and remembering negative things, stressful things, aversive experiences, that they really stick with us. We don't have a natural tendency to notice positive events quite as well. And especially when we're experiencing anxiety and depression symptoms, they can serve as a cloud that really gets in the way of us noticing positive events. So this is a foundational skill. So what we tell people is we say, this exercise is designed to help you notice and remember positive events that occur throughout the day. So at least once a day or throughout the day, write down one or more things that were positive, went well, or made you feel good. These things do not have to be big. They can be very simple, even everyday things. They can be an interaction you had with someone. something you did, something that happened to you, or something you witnessed happen to somebody else. So this is the first strategy that people engage in. And people are asked as they're doing this throughout their week to take notes. What was the positive event? Describe that event. What emotions did you experience? And we teach people to, describe emotions more than just I felt good or I felt bad. What type of positive emotions? I felt gratitude. I felt love. I felt enthusiastic, amused. Did you have any physical reactions? Did you notice what you were experiencing inside your body? Some people report feeling warm or maybe feeling light on their feet. How intense were those emotions and physical reactions? How long did they last? One of the things that we notice is that positive experiences tend to be relatively fleeting. So we want to get an idea about what's the duration of these experiences. And then what was the person's response? What did they do after that positive event? And so here's an example from a patient that completed our program. And so one of their positive events was a rainy day had cleared just in time for an afternoon swim with a close friend. They experienced gratitude, serenity, and hope. They felt energized, relaxed, and their mind was cleared. The intensity was about 80% and it lasted for 3 hours. And their response was they were eager to continue their day. They smiled and walked around in a more peaceful manner. And here's another example. And this seems like a relatively small, simple example. The person was out on their morning walk and 2 strangers smiled at them. And they noticed this and they tracked it and they felt hope, inspiration, and joy. And they felt warm inside their body. And the intensity was 95%. It lasted about 30 minutes. And what they did is they smiled back and said good morning. And they picked up their pace and they made a point to smile at everyone else that they passed by on their walk because they felt it was their duty to spread the good vibes and the kindness. Once people have gained some initial practice at noticing positive events, we teach them skills to amplify those events. And what we mean by amplify is to increase the intensity of the experience or to prolong the experience. Like I said, positive experiences, positive events tend to be very fleeting, especially when we experience anxiety and depression symptoms. So what are some of the things that we teach people to do? Well, we teach people to savor. What this means is we have people slow down. When you notice a positive event, take it all in, focus your attention on that one thing, that one positive event, immerse all of your senses into that event, and take your time with it. Again, we're often passed by positive events too quickly, so this is going to slow us down and really immerse ourselves in that experience. We teach people to reminisce, to look back, put yourself back into that positive situation, go through, engage in mental imagery, or maybe use something that you wrote about or a picture to cue your memory. Re-experience that positive emotion and those positive experiences you felt. We encourage people to express emotions. One of the things we tend to do is we tend to keep our emotions in check. Maybe we don't express them outwardly, or we even try to dampen or suppress our emotional experiences. And so what we teach people to do is to experience and to express positive emotions if it feels right and authentic for them to do so. We teach people to write about positive events. So that's one of the first steps, is to keep track of these things, to remember them, to enrich the event with details, and then to go back. You have a concrete record. You can go back and you can use that to reminisce and remember those positive events. We also encourage people to share positive events with others. We know that emotions are contagious. Positive emotions are contagious. So sharing positive experiences with someone can induce positive emotions in the other person and can help people build a connection. So people learn to apply these different amplification strategies throughout the program. We also teach people about gratitude, both to take note of things they're grateful for in their life, to describe why they're grateful for those things, and then to express gratitude to others, either verbally or through writing in some way. We also teach people to engage in acts of kindness. These are generous acts that require some level of time or effort. They don't need to be big, right? So it could be anything: smiling at someone, holding the door, letting somebody merge into traffic, filling an expired parking meter, helping a coworker that's struggling on a task, spending extra time with them, whatever it might be. And then finally, we teach people to not only notice and amplify positive events, but to plan and to schedule different types of positive events, events that bring us a sense of pleasure or enjoyment, events that are meaningful or important to us in some way, and events that are engaging, where we get lost and fully immersed in that experience. And one of the benefits of doing this is that we make a commitment to engaging in positive events, and then we have something to look forward to, future anticipation. And so these activities, this is the core of the program. And just like learning any new skill, people are encouraged to practice these, to apply these to their daily lives. So they learn about a different treatment technique, a different strategy within the session. And then they work with the clinician and they plan, what are they going to do throughout the week? How are they going to implement this into their daily lives? And the goal is, with enough practice, is for these things to become habits. So what did we find? So in our initial work, we wanted to determine the effects of this treatment program on positive emotions, right? This is where we thought we're addressing a treatment gap. Is our treatment effective at improving positive emotions in people seeking treatment for anxiety and depression? So what we did is we brought people in, we administered the program to them, and then we had a control group, and the control group just did the assessments before and after a 10-week waiting period. And we just wanted to determine, was there any impact of our treatment on positive emotions? So I'll orient you to this graph right here. What you see along the bottom, the horizontal axis, where it says before treatment, after treatment, 3 and 6 months later, this is over time. So we had people measure or respond to surveys measuring positive emotions over the course of treatment. And we wanted to see how much did positive emotions change in both the amplification of positivity group and our control group. And that green dotted line, that represents where people in the general community report their levels of positive emotions. So when you just survey people at random in the general community and you ask about positive emotions, that bar is where people usually are. So that's the goal. We're trying to see if we can get people back to that level. And that's exactly what we found. So we found that people who engaged in those amplification of positivity strategies improved in their positive emotions from before to after treatment. They were responding at levels similar to other people in the general community. And it was very encouraging, those improvements persisted 6 months after they had finished the treatment program. And so the idea is that people have been building new skills and applying these new skills in their daily lives. What was interesting is we also looked at the effects of the treatment on negative emotions. We know that anxiety and depression are characterized by different negative valence emotional experiences. And what we found is that amplification of positivity decreased negative emotions, and it decreased it to the extent that people reported negative emotions similar to others in the general community. And this was really interesting for us because we didn't directly target negative emotions in treatment, but the effects, by focusing on positivity, it had spillover effects at improving negative emotions as well. We also found that the treatment program increased people's perceptions of feeling connected to others in their lives. And again, this was really important. This was the main outcome we were hoping to focus on here. And again, these improvements persisted through the 6-month follow-up period. What we found, so because we measured both positive and negative emotions throughout treatment, and we measured people's perceptions of their connectedness throughout treatment, we could look and see to what extent is changes in connectedness predicted by improvements in positive emotions or reductions in negative emotions. And what we found is that increases in positive emotion from one session to the next predicted subsequent improvements in connectedness. And this was the most consistent finding. So again, it really helps support the idea that positivity is important in helping us connect with others. So this led us then to conduct a replication study. We wanted to replicate and extend our findings. And this is really important to do in the research world. We can't just trust what we find in one study. We want to make sure that these are reliable, consistent findings across different individuals who take part in the study. And one of the things we were interested in doing was seeing if we could detect an impact of our treatment beyond just people's self-reports, their subjective experiences, what they tell us. So what we did is we measured brain responses. And the reason we did this is because research suggests that there's parts of the brain that respond to positive social cues and positive social experiences. And this part of the brain that you can see there in that picture, the orange highlighted area there, it's called the striatum. And the reason this part of the brain is important for us is because it determines how rewarding or how positive things in our environment are. And what's neat about this brain region is it responds to a whole bunch of different rewards. It responds to money. It responds to delicious food like pieces of cake. It responds to witnessing something good happening to somebody that you're feeling close to, a close friend winning money. That this part of the brain signals a reward opportunity, something that people should pay attention to, and that it's worth putting energy and resources into seeking out and acquiring that potential positive experience. And so the way we measure responses in that part of the brain is we have people complete a computer game while they're getting a continuous picture of their brain taken while they're in an MRI machine. And so here's a picture of what this computer game looks like. And people are informed that their goal in this game is to win as much positive social feedback as possible. And positive social feedback is presented in the form of smiling faces. You can see there a smiling face. And what's really neat is that study after study has shown that the human brain, the striatum in particular, is very responsive to positive social cues. And this makes a lot of sense. We're a social species. So when we see a social cue that's affirmative, that's positive, this is a potential reward, a potential social connection opportunity. So people are told that on this task, they're going to see a cue shape that will let them know if they can win positive social feedback, or sometimes there's nothing at stake. It doesn't matter. There's no outcome. And then there's a target, and their goal is to press a button as quickly as possible when they see the target. If they press the button in time, they're presented with a smiling face. And if they don't present it or press it in time, they're not presented with a smiling face. There's a neutral outcome. And so what we can do is we can measure what the brain is doing when somebody is anticipating a positive social outcome. The reason this is relevant for anxiety and depression is we and others have done work to show that that part of the brain, the striatum that is, you see right there, it's not as activated when people experience symptoms of anxiety and depression relative to when they're not. And so we thought that this is an important part of the brain to see if our treatment could amplify. And so people completed this task in a brain imaging scan before and after they completed the treatment. And what we found is that amplification of positivity increased brain activation when people anticipated positive social feedback, when they had an opportunity to see that smiling face. And we found that the striatum was the area that improved in activation. So again, this was really promising because it gave us another way to look at how people might be changing as a result of the treatment. What we also did in the second study is we had people complete that social interaction task I told you about before and after treatment. And we measured how much positive emotions people experienced before and after the conversation. And what we found is that people who completed our amplification of positivity treatment, they showed improvements in positive emotions after that social interaction task relative to the control group. And finally, we found that when we asked people about their subjective sense of loneliness, how disconnected they felt from others in the world, we found that our amplification of positivity treatment decreased loneliness. And so again, we saw that across multiple different assessments, across brain imaging, across a social interaction task in the laboratory, and across people's just general sense of how connected they were or how alone they were feeling, that amplification of positivity improved those outcomes. So that's led us to conclude that positivity connects us with others, whereas diminished positivity disconnects us. And those initial findings have suggested that by amplifying positivity, it may help combat social disconnection in those who are experiencing anxiety and depression. So what that means is that people who engage in those activities, noticing positive events, amplifying them, savoring, reminiscing when they experience positive events, engaging in gratitude or acts of kindness, that by doing those things, people experienced improvements in positivity and improvements in social connectedness. So I'll end there by acknowledging and giving a special thanks to the funding agencies that have supported this work and made this work possible. For our connection with Research Match, which I was very fortunate to have support throughout this work that connected us to the volunteer community. And of course, to the research volunteers who spend time and effort going through our research, and for whom our research hopefully is intended to make a difference. So thank you very much. This is my wonderful research group. I'd say this is about 1/10 of the individuals who help make this work possible. So thank you to everyone on my team who helped make this work possible. And if you want to learn more about who we are and what we're about, here's our website, and a QR code will take you directly there. So thank you very much. I think we're going to do questions at the end, and I'm excited to hear people's thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. That was very interesting. And now I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing Susan Gurley. Susan is the Executive Director of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. Let me go ahead and share my slides for Susan. Hi, Susan.
Hi. First of all, Charlie, I found your presentation incredible and very helpful, actually, to my personal life. So thank you. It really makes, it really makes one think about things differently. And that's why I actually love the mental health field, because it makes one also think about people other than oneself, which is, I think, what we've been talking about. So I run the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, and ADAA is a unique type of organization within the mental health field. We are both a professional mental health organization, as well as an organization that provides free evidence-based resources and information to the public. And I would like to underscore the importance of it being evidence-based. And the reason we underscore that there's a lot of information out in the marketplace about new things, vitamins one should take, or different things one should use. And while that's all wonderful, our focus is in making sure that there is data and research behind anything that we offer the public on our website. And we have members like Dr. Taylor, who donate their time, who volunteer their time to develop the resources to ADAA. So a couple of things that I would like to highlight that one can avail themselves of, and the next slide is, again, the next slide is again that it is free. And the resources include webinars, podcasts, videos, and blogs, because we also realize that people absorb information differently. Some people like to read information, some people like to hear it orally. And also many of the people who come to our website believe themselves to be potentially suffering from anxiety and depression and related disorders, or they have family members or friends, and they come to our website to educate themselves so that they know or validate how they're feeling or how someone else is feeling. And also our job, and I think Leslie mentioned this in the beginning, and Loretta, we obviously urge people to go and see a medical professional. We view ourselves at ADAA as an entryway. You obtain information, you read, and then you take that information and you see a medical professional. That's very, very important. Again, to the point is that we, our medical members develop the information for the community. And as Charlie talked about not being alone and wanting to talk to people and being part of a community, we also have 2 online support groups. They're peer-to-peer. We have 80,000 people in our English-speaking support group and about 2,000 people in our Spanish-speaking support group. And what we hear as feedback, that it helps even for those who are just silently as part of the group, they feel that they're not alone, that there's others who feel the way they do, and that the recommendations of their peers are obviously very helpful to them. And Charlie would take note that much of what is discussed is that one should also have a journal to write down positive experiences. So many of the peers recommend that to their peers who are suffering. So I think that's very, very important. We also have a monthly newsletter that goes out to the public where we have articles and resources developed by our members. The next slide. The other thing, and I would be interested in hearing what Charlie has to say and the rest of the people on the call, we believe that it is very helpful to share one's story with the public. It helps oneself put pen to paper, how one feels, what one has done to feel better, and then share that story. We receive a lot of stories of what we call triumph, where people talk about their disorders, what they've done. It doesn't mean that everybody feels 100% better, but it talks about the journey that they have gone through. And again, as we have on the slide, the purpose is to inspire people and encourage them to talk to their friends and family, to their community, and obviously to get help when needed. So we hope that if people are interested on this call to share their story, also why they're volunteering, why are they taking their time, effort to work on these kind of projects, which will make a big difference, not just to themselves, but to people who come after them. So I think this is very important, our personal stories of triumph. And then I think there's one more slide. And that goes back just to remind everybody that, that we're a membership organization. We have social workers, psychiatrists, researchers, clinicians, basically anyone who is licensed who focuses on anxiety and depression and related disorders. And I really want to thank our membership because they don't just become members to learn from each other and attend the conference and be part of the journal as Charlie is. But so many of our members, as I mentioned before, donate their expertise, hours and hours of their time to develop resources for ADAA, which allows ADAA to share this information for free to the community. So we are incredibly thankful to our professional members who allow us to continue to be a mission-driven organization. So that's basically all I have about ADAA. I could go on for hours because I'm very passionate about this organization, because I believe that for many people who are suffering, it allows them to maybe in the evening or in the morning when they're by themselves to take the time and look at resources, obtain help, and also realize that how they're feeling inside might be felt by others. And that is in itself, I think, important, the feeling of not being alone and being part of a community. And then the question is, what does one do to get help? And I think that Dr. Taylor's thoughtful comments allow us to realize that in the end, we will not be alone if we take certain steps. And those steps, for many of us, not all of us, because some people suffer tremendous amount of personal anxiety and depression and cannot do some of the things we're talking about, but that we can reach out to people. And there are people on the other side of the screen, or our families or our friends, coworkers, a community that will listen. And that's important. So I'm very grateful to this group for allowing us to talk about ADAA and our resources. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Susan. We appreciate you. We appreciate both of you coming today. And Susan, you touched on how much we appreciate our volunteers and people who are willing to take part in studies like Dr. Taylor's. Whether you are experiencing anxiety or depression or whether you're not, that willingness to want to help others, that altruistic feeling that you want to help find cures is so important. It's so important. I think we don't value it enough in the United States. It's like giving blood. I mean, it's life-saving for people to have new research and new treatments out there.
I agree. And it's also the volunteers. That's why I wanted to mention the volunteering can come in so many different ways, but it's a circle. The people who are volunteering for these studies, Dr. Taylor and his colleagues who are volunteering their extra time to do these studies, then they share it with organizations like ADAA that we can then amplify that message. So all of these people are volunteering added time and effort. And that just shows what a difference people can make who volunteer their time pro bono. I mean, it really makes I think it's an undervalued part of discussions.
Well, thank you. Well, with that, we'll move on to questions. We have some coming in from the audience. Leslie, I'll pass this off to you.
Hello, everyone. We do have several questions. So I will try to filter these to the most appropriate person to answer them. I think, Dr. Taylor, most of them are for you. However, let's just start with this baseline around positivity. It seems like a novel concept, but also sort of a no-brainer. No pun intended. But how do those of us who didn't participate in this study take the learnings that you've just shared and incorporate them into our own lives if we want to amplify positivity in our own lives?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So, one of the challenges with research is it's a slow process. So I would love to say that we've, our treatment manual, we've got a workbook that we can disseminate to everybody, or that's available on our website. And we're still developing and refining this approach. What I can say, though, is I can point people to, and although I don't think I have a slide to this effect, but there are some, if you want to learn more about the general strategies that we use. And again, these are strategies that most of which were supported by research outside of the anxiety and depression, or outside of the mental health field. So just studying folks in the community, studying students, and we essentially built on that research. So I don't know if I should put maybe in the chat here, Sonia Lubomirsky, you may have seen that last name, if you could pronounce it, on one of the slides. She was a collaborator on our initial work and helped us develop the protocol. Her and her team gave us feedback. We essentially scoured the literature that she had been deeply immersed in and had contributed to with many other people. And she has written several books. These are meant for the general community. About one of them is called The How of Happiness. Another is a workbook, a 6-week program. Again, this is to give you a little bit more background. I'm not advocating per se for any of these specific things necessarily being helpful, but you'll see if you take a look at those resources, there's a lot of overlap. So they talk about gratitude, they talk about acts of kindness, savoring, the importance of social connections. So if you're interested in reading more about that, I definitely recommend that you look up Sonia.
Is she, this is Susan, is she a psychologist or is she in?
No, so she is a social psychologist.
Okay.
who started her work. She worked with one of the leading experts in rumination. So rumination is, when we think about with depression, we often get stuck and dwell on negative thoughts, negative experiences, perceived failures or perceived regrets. And we just sort of get stuck on those sorts of things. And that's where she started her work. And then she recognized that there was this whole other side of human experience and functioning that the field had not paid enough attention to. And there wasn't enough rigorous research. And so she decided to move in that direction. And so she has conducted, and again, she's not a clinical psychologist. So most of her work has been in non-clinical populations. Again, what we brought to the table is we essentially partnered with her and we said, we think that these strategies could be very helpful to the anxiety and depression community and probably other mental health conditions. And so that's the work that we've been doing. So again, I would recommend just for reading and to get a sense, one of the question was, how can I start to think about some of these strategies and how can I apply them? That will give you some background on that. Again, I would like to reiterate that if you're experiencing anxiety and depression, please connect with a mental health professional. Please access the ADAA resources. And I think this could be, a nice complement. And of course, stay tuned. We're, in the middle of our third clinical trial. Now we're comparing amplification of positivity to another treatment condition, which we think can be helpful for anxiety and depression. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll do another one of these in a year or two.
Thank you. We have a few more questions. So how can someone experience positive emotions when they feel anxious or depressed most of the time?
That's a really great question. So, and that was why we did this work. So we didn't know, for instance, right, that people that our work is intended to serve, most of their day-to-day experiences are things like anxiety, worry, fear, feeling sad, down, unmotivated. And it wasn't clear to us whether it was possible to create space for those positive experiences. And what we found that it is, that through behavior, right? So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about people changing behaviors, that by creating some space for those new behaviors, that it can generate positive emotions. And what we sort of think about this is that, the anxiety and depression has been driving the ship most of the time. Often it's on autopilot. And so it requires the person to put in some hard work to create more space for that. And if you can create more space, right? And that's why we start with that very straightforward activity, right? We don't want people changing things. Just pay attention. Just see, are there positive things out there? And it doesn't matter what scale, small, simple, everyday things. And when we first did the program, I wasn't sure would people come back with positive things that they were able to observe. And what we find is that the vast majority of people, no matter how anxious or depressed they're feeling, there are some small positive things they've noticed. And that's the space that we help then expand, and we help create more. Okay, now you've noticed some of these positive things. Can you amplify them? And so we teach people and we have people be curious. And so, yes, so the short answer is it is possible. It requires hard work, like changing any behavior. It requires hard work. And that's why we have people practice throughout the week to really hone their skills. And what we talk about throughout the program is that the depression and anxiety symptoms, they can interfere sometimes, right? So they can, our thoughts might tell us, well, what's the point of doing this? This is only going to be short-lived. This is a risky situation. You shouldn't do this. And so we help people disengage from those anxious and depressed thoughts and feelings and return their attention to focusing on positivity. And again, that's a skill and it takes time and practice. But the short answer is yes, that people can create space for positivity even when feeling anxious or depressed.
Yeah, I think what you just said is really powerful because it sounds like the negative experiences are like our default, and it really takes positivity to disrupt that feedback loop or whatever it is that is operating. So that's really powerful. Thank you for that. We had a question from the audience about amplifying positivity. Does it only, or let me just say what the direct question was. Does AMP only affect the brain?
versus other
Yeah.
physiological systems.
That's what I'm interpreting, because we don't have a second part of that question.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is it probably does. I mean, if you think about how we feel, how we act and behave, what we're motivated to do, what our thoughts and our feelings, everything, it's related to how our brain responds. It relates to different physiology. So what our heart rate is doing, what our respiration is doing, all of these different systems are connected, right? And they sort of feed back into one another, right? You think about stress hormones, things like cortisol. So I suspect that by having people change behaviors, right, it can impact these multiple systems. And that's what we're seeing with brain function. Now, we haven't measured and looked at things like, cortisol reactivity under stress, or some of these other, potential measurements. But what we do know, for instance, if you look at other literature and you look at things like people, engaging in positive emotions outside of this program, it does, for instance, do things like it increases, sort of heart rate variability, which is really that calming physiological system, right? When we're under stress and it calms us down, we find that positive emotions can engage that system. So I would suspect it does have impacts outside of the brain and outside of, how we perceive our feelings, but it's something we haven't measured yet.
That's also an interesting point, because those of us who wear these smartwatches,
Yes.
The heart rate variability is something we're probably, well, if you're like me, you check all the time, and that the literature behind it says that is an indication of basically your health status.
Yes.
So that's really important. So thanks for sharing that. We also had a question, and I'm not going to read the question verbatim, but really, how does someone improve their social connections? Like, how do we make more meaningful connections with, I guess, those in our community and those around us?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So this program is mostly focused on the amplifying positivity. What we find is as people are doing these activities and they're connecting the activities with what's important to them, what their values are, what's meaningful to them, they start to recognize that those are great places to begin, right? So sometimes, we have individuals that may come into the program and they have a social network. They've got friends and coworkers and acquaintances and family, but they just feel disconnected. And so they have that environment where they're able to, by building positivity, connect more. For other people, they might be a little bit more isolated and they're looking to build or expand their network. And we find that connecting with other people, connecting with organizations or activities or things where you share common values. So again, in that scheduling where people plan positive events, some of those events are meaningful or important events. And it might be like connecting with a religious organization or group. It might be connecting with a volunteer organization or group or some other group that shares a common interest. And what's nice about that is that the other people that are part of that are going to share some common interests and values. And that's a great way to sort of begin that. And then you can utilize some of the other positivity skills to establish those connections.
Well, I'm going to ask one more question. So Susan, I believe you mentioned, I guess, a space where people may be able to get together. I'm going to say virtually.
Yes.
Could you say a little bit more about that before we close? Because I do want people to have that in their back pocket, if you will, if they're wanting to connect with others, since we are talking about how social disconnection can have such, detrimental effects if you're not connected.
So it is an online peer-to-peer community. And when we say peer-to-peer, it really is. We have a group of professionals who will, if somebody asks a question about something related to research, we will respond. We will obviously also monitor to make sure there's not inappropriate behavior on the site. But it is really peer-to-peer. It is for people to be able to talk frankly about how they feel and ask for guidance and advice from others who are potentially feeling the same way. And what is interesting about our English-speaking online community, that it is an international online community. There are quite a few people from India, the Philippines, so mostly English-speaking. So it is not just for people who live within the United States. And what has been interesting, and I think a lot of the people on the community realize that it is a worldwide phenomena, so that others in other countries, other socioeconomic backgrounds, who don't look necessarily like us always, that we're all in the same situation together, looking how to feel better, how to connect, how to be part of a community. And then going back to the volunteer part, a lot of these peers are volunteering their experience and what has helped them with other members of the community. They are giving of themselves, because that also takes time and energy. So it's on our website. It's again, it's free, it's peer-to-peer, it's anonymous. And I hope people who want to be part of a community and share their expertise and how they feel and what has helped them join the community, because you make a difference. Each of you who does that makes a difference.
Thank you. I will turn it over to Loretta.
Thank you, Leslie. Leslie is a master's in public health. She's a patient engagement specialist, and we really appreciate her being part of the Research Match team. Thanks for moderating the question section, Leslie. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. This is always a pleasure to have you come, and I do hope you come back again in a couple of years. It's so important to talk about this. We were talking about the savoring part is so critical, especially when you're almost encouraged to be angry and negative all the time in the world that we're experiencing. It doesn't have to be that way.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Happy to come back anytime, and we'll get the next phase of our research done and be happy to share the findings.
Thank you. And thank you, Susan, for joining us and for everything that you're doing. And especially thank you, Research Match volunteers. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for being a volunteer. We just love you. And we hope that you continue to join us for these webinars. Please fill out the evaluation. We'd like to know what other webinars you'd like to see us produce. And we'll try to make that happen for you. Okay. Thank you, everybody.